In this video, the positive and negative side of each goddess will be described through Hellenic myths and then through poems, excerpts from essays, and books written in the last few decades. The work of women artists today shows how goddess energies are alive in women and in culture today. Each goddess has the power to be destructive or creative. Examples are selected that show both positive and negative aspects of each goddess. Hera. The story of Medea is the story of the Hera archetype lived out by human beings. When Jason needed to get the golden fleece, Hera and Athena convinced Aphrodite to make Medea fall in love with him. Quote, she betrayed her father and her country and brought about her brother's death, unquote, when she helped him steal the golden fleece. Jason vowed he would marry her and stay with her until he died. When they settled in Corinth, Jason took the opportunity to marry the daughter of the king and agreed to exile Medea and their 2 sons. Medea took revenge against the other woman by killing her and took revenge against Jason by killing their sons. Women over the last few centuries have recognized the kind of emotional prison women can experience within a marriage. In the 19th century, Margaret Fuller tried to make a woman more aware and reflective about their unhealthy dependence on marriage as a way to find meaning and purpose. Quote, I have urged on women independence of man, not that I do not think the sexes are mutually needed by each other, but because in woman this fact has led to an excessive devotion, which has cooled love, degraded marriage, and prevented either sex from being what it should be to itself or the other. I wish women to live, first, for God's sake. Then she will not make an imperfect man her God, and thus sink into idolatry. Then she will not take what is not fit for her from a sense of weakness and poverty. Then, if she finds what she needs in man embodied, she will know how to love and to be worthy of being loved. So the problem is not that marriage isn't sacred. It's just that in a patriarchy, it gets abused by men. Okay, Betsy Scholl gives a poetic description of the way women can be physically harmed by abusive husbands and still be unable to leave the relationship. The poem is called Farm Wife. The woman who has nodded to me from her porch for weeks still nods now, bobs her head, leading me inside to see 21 grandchildren posed on a shelf, sills full of colored glass. Twice, I heard, she left her husband, and then returned. He stays outside with the dogs, hollering them away from the barn. Chickens flutter and squall, leaving patches of brown feathers. She says she's been nodding 26 years. The doctor calls it the trembles, but she knows something sharper is pecking her brain. Twice his fists have hit, knocked her against the wall. Twice she returned to face of grandchildren perfectly still in the tilt of their frames, glass shining on every sill. To hens squawking themselves into trees whenever the dog comes near. She sweeps up the puddles of brown and white feathers that fear sends flying, pours them into tickling to cushion her restless, affirming head. In her poem, Prayer for Revolutionary Love, Denise Levertov gives a model of what a healthy egalitarian marriage would be like. That a woman not ask a man to leave meaningful work to follow her. That a man not ask a woman to leave meaningful work to follow him. That no one try to put Eros in bondage. That no one put a cudgel in the hands of Eros. That our loyalty to one another and our loyalty to our work not be set in false conflict. That our love for each other give us love for each other's work. That our love for each other's work give us love for one another. That our love for each other's work gives us love. That our love for each other, if need be, give way to absence and the unknown. That we endure absence, if need be, without losing our love for each other, without closing our doors to the unknown. Okay, Athena. The negative aspect of Athena as defender of the patriarchy is shown in the story of Athena and Arachne. Arachne, famous for her weaving, challenged Athena, goddess of crafts and weaving, to a contest over who was more skilled. Arachne's tapestry portrayed many of Zeus's affairs. Athena, very much her father's defender, punished her for making Zeus's deceitful and illicit behavior public. Antigone is an example from tragedy of a father's daughter who speaks against Creon the king out of a sense of divine law, a sense of justice beyond the power of any particular ruler. Like her father, she gets too angry. Creon overreacts himself, ordering her death through suffocation in a cave. Like all women living in a male-dominated situation, Creon's mistake ultimately rules the day, and Antigone dies before Creon is able to reconsider. So sometimes, for a sense of justice, Athena will defend the patriarchy, and sometimes she will criticize a certain ruler because of some higher sense of justice. In Killers of the Dream, Lillian Smith recognizes the injustices of racism and works for African American rights without becoming a hard-hearted manifestation of the Athena archetype. Quote, "Something was wrong with a world that tells you that love is good and people are important, and then forces you to deny love and humiliate people. I know, though I would not for years confess it aloud, that in trying to shut the Negro race away from us, we have shut ourselves away from so many good, creative, honest, deeply human things in life. I began to understand slowly at first, but more clearly as the years passed, that the warped, distorted frame we have put around every Negro child from birth is around every white child also. Each is on a different side of the frame, but each is pinned there, and I know that what cruelty shapes and cripples the personality of one is as cruelly shaping and crippling the personality of the other." More recently, Carter Haywood expresses a similar desire for justice without losing one's heart. Quote, "Love creates righteousness or justice here on earth. To make love is to make justice. As advocates and activists for justice know, loving involves struggle, resistance, and risk. People working today on behalf of women, blacks, lesbians, and gay men, the aging and the poor in this country and elsewhere, know that making justice is not a warm, fuzzy experience. Love is a conversion to humanity, a willingness to participate with others in the healing of a broken world and broken lives. Love is the choice to experience life as a member of the human family, a partner in the dance of life, rather than as an alien in the world or as a deity above the world, aloof and apart from human flesh." Artemis is the twin sister of Apollo, daughter of Leto and Zeus. She's goddess of the hunt and the moon, spending her time outdoors. The Artemis archetype gives women the innate ability to concentrate intensely on what is important to her. The destructive side of Artemis can be extreme. Although an Artemis woman is more likely angry at a man or men in general for depreciating her or for failing to treat with respect something she values, Artemis can also be cruel toward women. At one point, Niobe boasted to Leto that Leto only had one son and one daughter, while Niobe had 6 of each. Artemis and Apollo avenged the insult to their mother by killing all her children. In tragedy, Hippolytus worships Artemis and rejects Aphrodite. When his stepmother Phaedra falls in love with him and confesses her passion, Hippolytus is so appalled and unforgiving that Phaedrus responds by killing herself and leaving a note claiming that Hippolytus raped her. Hippolytus dies indirectly at the hands of his father and her husband. Artemis vows revenge and takes it on Aphrodite. When Aphrodite falls in love with Adonis, Artemis has him killed. Okay. Annie Dillard is a contemporary example of the Artemis archetype. Her book, Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, is a story of her love affair with the natural world. At one point, she describes her quest to really commune with nature. Quote, "The secret of seeing is, then, the pearl of great price. If I thought he could teach me to find it and keep it forever, I would stagger barefoot across 100 deserts after any lunatic at all. But although the pearl may be found, it may not be sought. The literature of illumination reveals this above all. Although it comes to those who wait for it, it is always, even to the most practiced and adept, a gift and a total surprise. I return from one walk, knowing where the killdeer nests in the field by the creek and the hour the laurel blooms. I return from the same walk a day later, scarcely knowing my own name. Litanies hum in my ears, my tongue flaps in my mouth. Alleluia! I cannot cause light. The most I can do is try to put myself in the path of its beam. It is possible in deep space to sail on solar wind. Light, be it particle or wave, has a force. You rig a giant sail and go. The secret of seeing is to sail on solar wind. Hone and spread your spirit till you yourself are a sail, wedded, translucent, broadside to the merest puff." Mary Oliver is another contemporary poet who spends her life amidst nature and writes about her responses to it. The poem The Journey, however, focuses on another aspect of the Artemis archetype, her independence of mind. One day you finally knew what you had to do and began, though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice, though the whole house began to tremble and you felt the old tug at your ankles. "Mend my life," each voice cried, but you didn't stop. You knew what you had to do, though the wind pried with its stiff finger at the very foundation, though their melancholy was terrible. It was already late enough, and a wild night, and the road full of fallen branches and stones, but little by little, as you left their voices behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, and there was a new voice, which you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life you could save. So that notion of having an inner voice and having a sense of calling is very Greek, or it's very intuitive. Aphrodite. When activated negatively, Aphrodite can do great damage to relationships. When Zeus, Apollo, and the other gods are influenced by her, they get into sexual relationships that victimize the other goddesses in their relationship to the god and to the other goddesses. Many mortal women, including Mira, were destroyed by Aphrodite, either because Mira's mother boasted that her daughter was more beautiful than Aphrodite, or because Mira refused to worship Aphrodite. The goddess caused Mira to fall passionately in love with her father. She disguised herself so they could have an affair. His disgust at finding out the truth led him to try and kill her. Mortal men who rejected Aphrodite, such as Hippolytus, were also severely punished by her. Nancy Willard describes the horror and pain that results when men are possessed by Aphrodite and rape an unwilling target. Clearing the air. It's been 10 years since you tried to kill me. Biking home one night, I saw only your legs stepping behind a tree. Then you fell on my throat like a cat. My books crashed the birds out of sleep. We rolled in the leaves like lovers. My eyes popped like Christmas lights. Veins snapped. Your teeth bore my blood. Your fingers left bars on my neck. I can't remember your name, and I saw your face only in court. You sat in a box, docile as old shoes, and I, who had never felt any man's weight, sometimes felt yours for nights afterwards. Well, I'm ready to forgive, and I don't want to forget. Sometimes I tell myself that we met differently on a train. You gave me a Batman comic and showed me your passport. I have nothing but my report card, but I offer my mother's fudge for the grapes, rotting the one paper bag you carry. In my tale you are younger and loved. Outside you live in 1,000 faces, and so do your judges, napping in parks, rushing to fires, folded like bats on the truck, mad and nude in a white rolls, pinching dollars and leather behinds. Burned from a tree by your betters, you take to the streets and hand in the dark like a star, making me see your side, waking me with the blows and the weight of it. At the other extreme, Sharon Olds presents a poetic image of a man under the same influence, but whose sexual passion is connected to marriage, children, and respect for the bodily integrity of his wife. New mother. A week after our child was born, you cornered me in the spare room, and we sank down on the bed. You kissed me and kissed me. My milk undid its burning slipknot through my nipples, soaking my shirt. All week I had smelled of mild, fresh milk, sour. I began to throb. My sex had been torn easily as cloth by the crown of her head. I'd been cut with a knife and sewn, the stitches pulling at my skin. And the first time you're broken, you don't know you'll be healed again, better than before. I lay in fear and blood and milk while you kissed and kissed me, your lips hot and swollen as a teenage boy's. Your sex dry and big, all of you so tender, you hug over me, over the nest of stitches, over the splitting and tearing, with the patience of someone who finds a wounded animal in the woods and stays with it, not leaving its side until it's whole, until it can run again. I guess as a postscript, her husband did leave her for another woman, and she's got some good poems about that. But this was in better days. As a young woman, while picking a narcissus, so the next one is Persephone. Persephone was kidnapped by Hades and taken to the underworld. As a grown woman, she became the queen of the underworld. Symbolically, the underworld can represent deeper layers of the psyche, a place where memories and feelings have been buried, the personal unconscious, and where images, patterns, instincts, and feelings that are archetypal and shared by humanity are found, the collective unconscious. Persephone, the queen and guide of the underworld, represents the ability to move back and forth between the ego-based reality of the real world and the unconscious or archetypal reality of the psyche. When the Persephone archetype is active, it's possible for a woman to mediate between the two levels and to integrate both into her personality. Rita Dove's book of poetry, Mother Love, focuses on the story of Persephone and her mother, Demeter, in the play Party Dress for a Firstborn. Rita Dove gives the image of Persephone as an innocent young maiden. In Persephone Falling, she describes the abduction, and in the Narcissus Flower, she describes Persephone's state of soul as a grown woman. This is the first poem, Party Dress for a Firstborn. Headless girl, so ill at ease on the bed, I know, if you could, what you're thinking of. Nothing. I used to think that too, whenever I sat down to a full plate or unwittingly stepped on an ant. When I ran to my mother, waiting radiant as a cornstalk at the end of the field. Nothing else mattered. The world stood still. Tonight men stride like elegant scissors across the lawn to the woman arrayed there, petals waiting to loosen. When I step out disguised in your blushing skin, they will nudge each other to get a peck, and I will smile, all the while wishing them dead. Mother's calling, stand up, it will be our secret. Persephone falling. One narcissus among the ordinary beautiful flowers, one unlike all the others. She pulled, stooped to pull harder, when, sprung out of the earth on his glittering, terrible carriage, he claimed his due. It is finished. No one heard her. No one. She had strayed from the herd. Remember, go straight to school. This is important. Stop fooling around. Don't answer to strangers. Stick with your playmates. Keep your eyes down. This is how easily the pit opens. This is how one foot sinks into the ground. Then the narcissus flower. I remember my foot in its frivolous slipper, a frightened bird, not the earth unzipped, but the way I could see my own fingers and hear myself scream as the blossom incinerated, and though nothing could chasten the plunge, this man, adamant as a knife, easing into the humblest crevice, I found myself at the center of a calm so pure it was hate. The mystery is, you can eat fear before fear eats you. You can live beyond dying and become a queen whom nothing surprises. In her book, Letters from a War Zone, Andrea Dworkin describes her experience while writing a book on pornography, an experience much like the archetype of Persephone. Quote, in writing my new book, I experienced the most intense isolation I've known as a writer. I lived in a world of pictures, women's bodies displayed, women hunched and spread and hanged and pulled and tied and cut, and in a world of books, gang rape, pair rape, man-on-woman rape, lesbian rape, animal-on-woman rape, evisceration, torture, penetration, excrement, urine, and bad prose. The reading itself made me physically sick. I became frightened and anxious and easily irritable. But the worst was that I retreated into silence. I felt that I could not make myself understood, that no one would know or care, and that I could not risk being considered ridiculous. And Andrea Dworkin did get a lot of negative projection, shadow projection. She became the object of male shadow and was demonized and denigrated quite a bit in her life once she became a writer. Okay, this is Demeter. When Persephone is taken by Hades, Demeter reacts obsessively and refuses to allow anything to grow. Finally, the gods bribe her and convince her, once they've agreed to allow Persephone to return for one half of the year. Psychologically, when a woman of late middle age becomes depressed, angry, and disappointed because her adult children are emotionally or physically distant, she becomes a grieving Demeter. She is obsessed by her sense of loss and constricts her interest. Her psychological growth stops. In Mother Love, Rita Dove imagines Demeter's reaction when Persephone was abducted. She cried out for Mama, who did not hear. She left with a wild eye thrown back. She left with curses, rage, that withered her feathers to a hag's. No one can tell a mother how to act. There are no laws when laws are broken, no names to call upon. Some say there's nourishment for pain and call it philosophy. That's for the birds, vulture and hawk, the large ones who praise the miracle of flight because they use it so diligently. She left us singing in the field, oblivious to all but the ache in our own bent backs. Sharon Olds also describes her experience of being a new mother. So this is the positive side of Demeter. Her first week. She was so small I would scan the crib a half second to find her, face down in a corner, limp, as something gently flung down, or fallen from some sky an inch above the mattress. I would tuck her arm along her side and slowly turn her over. She would tumble over part by part like a load of damp laundry in the dryer. I'd slip a hand in under her neck, slide the other under her back, and evenly lift her up. Her little bottom sat in my palm. Her chest contained the puckered sacs, and her neck, I was afraid of her neck. Once I almost thought I heard it quietly snap. I looked at her, and she swiveled her slate eyes and looked at me. It was in my care, the curvature of her spine, like the first chordate, as if the history of the vertebrate had been placed in my hands. Every time I checked, she was still with us. Some day there would be a human race. I could not see it in her eyes, but when I fed her, gathered her like a loose bouquet to my side, and offered the breast, grayish white, and struck with minuscule scars like creaks in sunlight, I felt she was serious. I believed she was going to say. Hestia. As an archetype on inner wisdom, Hestia lacks negativity. This is not surprising that Hestia doesn't present the usual potential patterns of pathology. In a male-dominated society, not surprising, the only negative aspect of Hestia is her tendency to be ignored. To live as Hestia means to be self-effacing, anonymous, a non-entity who nonetheless has a central position in the household. A Hestia woman characteristically lacks assertiveness and doesn't speak up if she feels discounted or devalued. May Sarton describes the slow process by which a Hestian woman goes from denying her own focus of consciousness for the sake of well-being of others to finally being able to come into her own and live under the power of her own natural archetype. Now I become myself. Now I become myself. It's taken time, many years and places. I've been dissolved and shaken, worn other people's faces, run madly as if time were there, terribly old, crying a warning, "Hurry, you will be dead before—" What? Before you read the morning paper, or the end of the poem is clear, or love safe in the walled city? Now to stand still, to be here, feel my own weight and destiny. The black shadow on the paper is my hand, the shadow of a word, as thought shapes the shaper, falls heavy on the page, is heard. All uses now falls into place, from wish to action, word to silence, my work, my love, my time, my face, fathered into one intense gesture of growing like a plant, as slowly as the ripening fruit, fertile, detached, and always spent, falls but does not exhaust the root. So all the poem is, can give, grows, in me to become the song, made so and rooted so by love. Now there's time, and time is young. Of in this single hour I live, all of myself, and do not move. I, the pursued, who madly ran, stand still, and stop the sun. So again, she's talking about finding her song, which is very Greek, it's very intuitive, and it's rooted in love. Her song is her poem, her poetry. In an excerpt from A Conversation with Gunter Goss, Hannah Arendt, a well-known public intellectual during the 1950s, exposes Mr. Goss's own excess concern for fame and describes her own motivation for writing, expressing the orientation of a Hestian woman. Quote, "What is important for me is to understand. For me, writing is a matter of seeking this understanding," which of course is classic. All human beings by nature desire to understand, so she's certainly fitting the archetype. "You ask me about the effects of my work on others. If I may wax ironical, this is a masculine question. Men always want to be terribly influential, but I see that as somewhat external. Do I imagine myself being influential? No. I want to understand, and if others understand in the same sense that I have understood, that gives me a sense of satisfaction, like feeling at home. Of course, these videos are very much in that spirit. Okay, Andrea Dworkin also writes, in order to understand, quote, writing is not a happy profession. The writer lives and works in solitude, no matter how many people surround her. Her most intensely lived hours are spent with herself. The pleasure and pains of writing are talked around or about, but not shared. Her friends do not know what she does or how she does it. Like everyone else, they see only the results. The problems of her work are unique. The solution to one sentence is not the solution to any other sentence. No one else knows where she's going until she herself has gotten there. When others are contemplating the results, she's on her next project, all alone again. Her colleagues and competitors, for the most part, are dead. The work itself involves using the mind in an intense and punishing way. The solitude demanded by the work is extreme in and of itself. Others rarely live so alone, so self-created. The 7 feminine archetypes are powerful psychological forces in the souls of women. Each archetype has a positive and negative side and can be motivated by eros, a creative drive, or by thanatos, a destructive drive. In a patriarchal culture, the positive drive is frustrated or destroyed, and the destructive side emerges as a response to this unjust suffering. The purpose of this video has been to describe the many dimensions of the anima force in women's psyches so that everyone, men and women, can work toward creating a less patriarchal society, one that includes the anima in all of its creative dimensions. And I will say that Jean Bolin, who wrote the book about goddesses in every woman, and in that book her final conclusion was individuation, learning how to find the positive spark in each of those goddesses and then have them all woven together. Ms. Bolin has now quit her practice as an archetypal psychologist, and she's becoming a proponent of goddess religion or goddess spirituality, and she's starting women's circles and something like a coven. So she's sort of changed. Maybe she's gotten too discouraged that trying to work within the culture of patriarchy is just too difficult. Okay, in the next video, I'll talk about a book that I wrote about my own experiences with the 7 goddesses, and just give the last chapter, which is one where the goddesses are all talking to each other about what they have to do to try and save the earth, basically try and cultivate a sustainable society in this situation of possible self-destruction.